Imagine being a German soldier in 1944, captured on the battlefield after years of brutal fighting. You've been told that America is weak, poor, and falling apart under the pressure of war. But when your transport ship finally reaches the coast of the United States, what you see leaves you speechless. No ruins, no chaos, just endless highways, neat farms, and cities shining with lights. For the first time you realize everything you believed about America was a lie. Main story begins. When German prisoners of war began arriving in America during the later years of World War II, they carried with them fear and uncertainty. Most of them had been captured in North Africa, France, or Italy, and after weeks at sea they expected to be treated harshly by their captors. Many imagined that the Americans would take revenge for the bombings and killings that German forces had carried out across Europe. Some even thought they might not survive the journey. But the moment they stepped onto American soil, their expectations were shattered. Instead of angry crowds or armed soldiers screaming at them, they saw calm order and discipline. American guards treated them not as monsters, but as professional soldiers who had simply lost the fight. This simple act of respect immediately confused the prisoners. It wasn't what they were told to expect. Back in Germany, Nazi propaganda had painted a dark image of the United States. Posters and radio broadcasts described America as a broken society, full of crime, hunger, and racial conflict. Germans were told that American soldiers were poorly trained and weak-willed, and that their country was collapsing under the strain of war. So when these German prisoners arrived in a nation where grocery stores were full, farms were flourishing, and people were free to live their lives without fear, it was like landing on another planet. The first camps that received German POWs were in places like Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma. Many of these camps were built quickly but efficiently, surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers, yet surprisingly clean and organized. The prisoners were given new uniforms, medical care, and warm meals 3 times a day. For men who had spent years surviving on thin rations in freezing trenches or bombed-out cities, it felt unreal. Some prisoners later wrote in their diaries that they couldn't believe the food they were served. They were given coffee, meat, bread, and sometimes even desserts. One German soldier remembered being handed a bar of soap, something he hadn't seen in months, and realizing for the first time how well supplied the Americans truly were. Others were stunned by the kindness of the camp guards, who often treated them like equals rather than enemies. Life in the camps followed strict routines, but it was far from miserable. Prisoners were encouraged to work, mostly on farms, factories, or local construction projects. They were paid small wages that they could spend at camp stores on cigarettes, snacks, or stationery. Many were even allowed to write letters home through the Red Cross. This humane treatment wasn't accidental. It was part of America's effort to follow the Geneva Convention, the international rules for the treatment of prisoners of war. Still, for the German POWs, it felt almost unbelievable. They had expected to be starved, beaten, or left to rot. Instead, they were allowed to play soccer, read books, and even attend classes. Some camps offered English lessons or vocational training. Others had small orchestras where prisoners could play music in the evenings. For soldiers who had seen the horrors of war, this strange new life in America was both comforting and confusing. At first, many refused to believe that what they were seeing was real. They thought it must be some kind of illusion, perhaps that America was showing off a false image to demoralize them. Some believed that they were being kept in a special camp, meant only for propaganda, while the rest of America suffered in poverty. But as months passed and more prisoners were transported across different parts of the country, they all saw the same thing: stability, abundance, and order. They couldn't understand how a country that had only entered the war in 1941 could be so well-fed, so well-equipped, and so peaceful compared to war-torn Europe. It was a stunning realization of America's industrial and social power. For many prisoners, it completely changed their perception of the enemy. In Germany, they had been told that Americans fought only for money and lacked discipline or honor. But in the camps, they saw American soldiers who were polite, efficient, and often friendly. Guards would sometimes talk to them, discuss baseball, or even share cigarettes. These small human moments broke through years of hatred and propaganda. One German officer later said, "It was in America that I first saw what true democracy looked like." The psychological impact was profound. These prisoners began comparing what they saw in America with what they knew of life back home: bombed cities, ration cards, strict government control, and constant fear. In contrast, the United States was calm, organized, and confident. It wasn't just the material wealth that impressed them, it was the freedom and optimism of the people. Even during wartime, Americans laughed, went to movies, and lived their lives without the shadow of dictatorship. For some German soldiers, this experience planted a seed of doubt about everything they had believed. They started questioning Nazi ideology and its portrayal of the outside world. A few even began to admire American democracy and freedom. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was real. When they were finally sent back to Germany after the war, many carried with them new ideas about what a nation could be. Not all experiences were positive, of course. There were strict rules in the camps, and escape attempts were punished. Some guards treated prisoners harshly, especially in the early years when emotions were still raw. But overall, the system worked with remarkable fairness. The majority of prisoners followed the rules, worked hard, and waited for the war to end. Outside the camps, local American communities had mixed feelings about the German prisoners living nearby. Some farmers welcomed their help, especially since so many American men were fighting overseas. Others were uneasy about having the enemy so close. But as time went on, many Americans realized that these prisoners were just young men, far from home, caught up in a war they didn't control. In many small towns, friendly relationships developed. There are even stories of former POWs returning to America after the war to visit the places where they once worked as prisoners. One of the most unforgettable things for the German POWs was the abundance of everything. Even in camps, they had better food and living conditions than civilians in Germany. They saw American cars, highways, and factories, signs of an industrial strength that Germany simply couldn't match. They began to understand why their leaders had failed. They had underestimated the scale of American power. For many, the moment they realized the truth about America was also the moment they knew Germany could never win the war. The contrast was too great. While their homeland was burning, America was thriving. That realization hit harder than any weapon. It was psychological defeat. As more ships brought prisoners across the Atlantic, the same reaction repeated again and again: shock, disbelief, and quiet admiration. America was not the enemy they had imagined. It was, in many ways, the future, a symbol of what Germany could have been if it had chosen a different path. By the end of the war, over 400,000 German POWs had been held in the United States. For most of them, it was an experience that changed their understanding of the world. When they finally went home, many spoke not of hatred, but of respect for the fairness, discipline, and strength of the Americans who had once been their captors. And it all began with that first moment, stepping off a ship, looking around, and realizing that the land they had been told was weak was actually one of the strongest nations on earth. When the German prisoners began settling into life in America, they slowly started to understand just how different this country was from what they had been told. At first, they were cautious, keeping their distance and following orders quietly. Many of them were still proud soldiers of Hitler's army, unwilling to show weakness. But as the weeks turned into months, curiosity began to replace fear. The POW camps were secure, but they weren't dark or cruel places. There was order, fairness, and even a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, these men didn't have to worry about bombs, cold nights, or running out of food. It was an odd kind of freedom, even behind barbed wire. Every morning, the prisoners would wake up to the sound of a bugle or whistle. They had breakfast, often with coffee, eggs, and bread, meals that felt like luxury after the shortages in Europe. Then came roll call, followed by assignments. Many of them were sent to work on American farms or in lumber yards, helping with the country's labor shortage. The irony wasn't lost on them. The men who had once dreamed of conquering the world were now harvesting crops for the very nation they fought against. Yet surprisingly, most didn't complain. They preferred work to boredom, and it gave them a sense of purpose. Farmers who employed these German POWs were often surprised too. They expected hatred or laziness, But what they found were disciplined, hardworking young men who took pride in doing a job well. In many rural towns, quiet friendships began to form between American families and the prisoners who worked on their land. Sometimes the farmers' children would sneak the POWs homemade pies or soft drinks. Some prisoners even learned English through casual conversation while working in the fields. It was a strange and human connection in the middle of a global war. For the German prisoners, the most shocking thing wasn't just the kindness of individual Americans, it was the strength and comfort of the entire country. Even during wartime, America seemed untouched by destruction. There were no bombed-out cities, no starving civilians. People had cars, radios, and laughter. It was impossible not to compare it to Germany, where cities like Hamburg, Cologne, and Berlin lay in ruins. The prisoners realized that the United States had resources beyond anything they had imagined. America wasn't just winning the war, it was thriving it while doing so. Inside the camps, the prisoners tried to recreate a sense of normal life. They organized soccer games, built small theaters, and even put on plays. Some camps allowed prisoners to start small gardens, and others had workshops where they could make furniture, toys, or carvings. A few talented artists painted murals on the barracks walls, while musicians formed small orchestras. These activities helped them forget the uncertainty of their situation and reminded them of home. Education was another unexpected opportunity. In some camps, the U.S. Army allowed POWs to take classes in subjects like English, mathematics, or agriculture. A few camps even had lecture programs where German officers could teach their fellow prisoners. For many of these men, it was the first time they had been encouraged to think freely without the constant pressure of Nazi ideology. Slowly, some began to question what they had been taught back home. The America they saw was not the evil, collapsing nation that propaganda had described. It was prosperous, free, and full of opportunity. Letters from home also played an important role in shaping the POWs' emotions. Through the Red Cross, they could send and receive mail from their families in Germany. The contrast between their peaceful life in America and the devastation described in those letters was heartbreaking. Some learned that their homes had been destroyed or that family members had died in bombings. Many felt guilty, safe and well-fed in a foreign country, while their loved ones suffered back home. This guilt made them think deeply about the choices their nation had made and the war that had brought them here. Over time, many POWs began to see the Americans not as enemies, but as examples of what a free society could look like. They noticed that guards could talk openly about politics, criticize leaders, or discuss personal beliefs without fear. It was something unthinkable in Nazi Germany, where even a wrong word could mean imprisonment or worse. This open culture left a deep impression on many prisoners. They began to see that America's real power wasn't just in its factories or armies. It was in its freedom. Of course, not everyone changed their views. Some die-hard Nazis remained loyal to Hitler until the end, refusing to accept defeat or the possibility that Germany could be wrong. They tried to intimidate other prisoners, calling them weak for admiring their captors. In some camps, this led to secret tension and conflict between groups. But as the war dragged on and news of Germany's defeat spread, even the most stubborn began to lose faith. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. One event that struck many POWs deeply was the day they learned about D-Day, the Allied invasion of France in June 1944. American guards didn't hide the news. Newspapers were sometimes passed around the camps. For the first time, the prisoners realized how powerful the Allies had become. They could sense that the end of the war was approaching and that Germany's dreams of domination were fading fast. The news filled them with mixed emotions, sadness, relief, and fear of what awaited them when they eventually returned home. As the war neared its end, daily life in the camps became almost routine. Many prisoners found small joys in simple things: a letter from home, a warm meal, or a friendly smile from an American guard. Some even began writing diaries, documenting their experiences and their changing opinions about the world. These diaries, discovered decades later, reveal how deeply the experience affected them. One soldier wrote, "I came to America as a loyal Nazi. I will leave it as a man who knows what freedom feels like." When victory finally came for the Allies in 1945, the camps filled with mixed emotions. The prisoners knew the war was over, but they didn't know what would happen next. Some feared they would be punished or sent to ruined cities in Germany with nothing left. Others hoped to stay in America, a place they had come to admire. But orders soon came for repatriation, the process of sending prisoners back home. It was time to say goodbye to the strange land that had treated them better than they ever expected. Before leaving, many German prisoners expressed gratitude to their American guards. Some wrote thank you letters. Others gave small handmade gifts or drawings. It was a quiet, human farewell between former enemies who had come to understand each other. A few guards even admitted that they had grown fond of the men they once saw as the enemy. War had brought them together under extraordinary circumstances, and now it was ending, leaving behind memories that would last a lifetime. In the years after the war, countless former POWs spoke about how their time in America had changed their lives. They returned to a Germany that was destroyed, divided, and struggling to rebuild. Yet many carried with them new ideas about democracy, freedom, and human dignity. Some became teachers, businessmen, or local leaders who helped rebuild their country. They often said that their first lessons in democracy came not from books, but from the kindness they experienced in American POW camps. The story of these German prisoners is one of humanity in the middle of war. They came expecting cruelty and found compassion. They were told their captors were weak, but saw strength built on freedom and fairness. For many, it was the most unusual and eye-opening experience of their lives. By the time the last German POWs left America, the world had changed forever. But deep in their hearts, many of them carried a simple truth, that sometimes, even in war, understanding your enemy can lead to respect, and respect can plant the first seeds of peace. When the German prisoners finally settled into life in America, they slowly began to understand just how different this country was from what they had been told. At first, most of them were cautious and kept to themselves, still holding tightly to the pride and discipline of being soldiers of the German army. They had been trained to view Americans as weak, greedy, and chaotic. But from the moment they arrived, they realized that nothing they had been taught prepared them for the reality. The camps were secure, of course, with fences and guards, but inside they were surprisingly clean, organized, and even peaceful. For the first time in years, these men felt a strange kind of calm, almost like a pause in the war they had been fighting for so long. Every day in the camp started with a routine that was both strict and fair. Prisoners would wake up to the sound of a bugle or whistle and march to breakfast, which was usually hearty and plentiful. They were given eggs, bread, coffee, and sometimes fresh fruit, a welcome change from the thin rations and spoiled food they had endured in Europe. Many prisoners of war were amazed at the variety and quality of the meals. Some even joked quietly among themselves, wondering if all Americans lived this well. The simple act of being fed 3 good meals a day, something they had once taken for granted back home, was now a small miracle. After breakfast, the prisoners attended roll call and were assigned their daily tasks. Many were sent to work on nearby farms or in local factories to help with America's labor shortage, as millions of American men were fighting overseas. For the prisoners of war, this was strange yet satisfying work. They chopped vegetables, harvested crops, helped build structures, and sometimes drove tractors under the supervision of American farmers. Despite being captives, most of the prisoners approached their jobs with discipline and diligence. They knew that working hard was expected, but many also found it gave them purpose and helped pass the time. The farmers and American employers were often surprised by the POWs' attitude. They had expected resentment, laziness, or defiance, but instead they found men who were disciplined, respectful, and often eager to do a good job. In some towns, a quiet friendship began to develop between the prisoners and local communities. Children would sneak them apples or homemade treats, and adults sometimes spoke to them, asking about life in Germany or sharing stories about their own families. These small human connections, formed in the middle of a war, left a deep impression on the prisoners. Many began to see Americans not as enemies, but as ordinary people living their lives with dignity and kindness. Inside the camps, life was surprisingly comfortable. The barracks were clean and organized, and prisoners were allowed recreational activities. Soccer and baseball games were common, providing a sense of normalcy and enjoyment. Some camps had music programs or small theaters, allowing prisoners to perform plays or concerts. They could also engage in hobbies such as painting, carpentry, or reading. Libraries were set up with books in German, giving the POWs an opportunity to learn and reflect. This access to leisure and intellectual activity was entirely unexpected. For men who had spent years in war, this kind of normal life felt almost surreal. Education was another aspect that amazed the German prisoners. Many camps allowed POWs to attend classes in English, mathematics, agriculture, and vocational skills. Some even held lectures taught by fellow prisoners who were officers or had specialized knowledge. For many of these men, this was the first time in years they had been encouraged to think freely without the constant pressure of Nazi ideology. Slowly, a shift began to take place in their minds. The America they saw was not the evil or chaotic nation their leaders had described. It was orderly, prosperous, and full of opportunity. The contrast between life in America and the destruction they knew in Germany was stark. Cities like Berlin, Hamburg, and Dresden had been bombed and lay in ruins, while America's towns and farms thrived. POWs could see the difference in infrastructure, food availability, and public safety. They began to realize how vast and powerful America really was. It was not just military strength that impressed them, but the ability of the country to maintain normal life and productivity even while at war. This revelation was both shocking and humbling. Letters home, sent through the Red Cross, revealed the inner thoughts of many prisoners. Some wrote cautiously about the abundance they experienced, the kindness of the guards, and the surprising freedoms they witnessed. They described clean facilities, plentiful food, and the friendliness of ordinary Americans. These letters were sometimes hidden from Nazi authorities, as they contradicted the propaganda that painted America as weak and decadent. Yet the truth was impossible for the prisoners to ignore, and it slowly changed how they viewed their captors and even the war itself. Another major shock for the POWs was the behavior of their American guards. Instead of being harsh or abusive, the guards were professional, respectful, and often approachable. They treated the prisoners with fairness, maintaining authority without cruelty. Many guards would converse casually, share meals, or even talk about baseball and family life. For men who had spent years under strict and often brutal discipline, this humane treatment left a lasting impression. It taught them that strength could coexist with respect and kindness, a lesson many never expected to learn from an enemy. Some prisoners also had the opportunity to travel outside the camps for work, which further exposed them to American culture and daily life. They visited local towns, observed schools, grocery stores, and markets, and even rode trains or buses. These experiences showed them the reality of American society, orderly, prosperous, and full of people who were free to live their lives. And it was a stark contrast to the strict control, rationing, and destruction they had left behind in Europe. Many prisoners of war were struck by how well Americans seemed to manage their war effort while still living comfortably and freely. Sports and leisure played a key role in helping prisoners adjust to camp life. Soccer matches, baseball games, and organized competitions provided physical activity and a sense of camaraderie. They allowed prisoners to release stress and build friendships with fellow soldiers. Music and theater offered a different kind of escape, letting them explore creativity and self-expression. These opportunities for recreation and culture were unimaginable in the battlefields of Europe, where survival was the only focus. Over time, many POWs began to reflect deeply on their experiences in America. They saw that the Nazi portrayal of the United States as weak and chaotic was completely false. The country's industrial power, social organization, and humane treatment of prisoners revealed a nation far stronger than Germany. Some prisoners started to question the beliefs they had been raised with. They observed the freedoms Americans enjoyed, the ability to speak, read, and live without fear of government punishment. These observations often led to internal conflict as they struggled to reconcile what they had been taught with what they now saw. News from the outside world, brought to the camps through newspapers or broadcasts, further changed the prisoners' perspective. They learned about key events like D-Day and the progress of Allied forces, realizing that Germany was losing the war. For many, the combination of seeing American life firsthand and hearing about Germany's defeats made the situation painfully clear. The war was ending, and Germany had been decisively outmatched, not only in terms of military strength, but in overall societal organization and capability. The POWS experience in America left a lasting psychological impact. Many returned home after the war with new ideas about democracy, freedom, and human rights. They had seen firsthand that even an enemy could treat people with dignity, and they carried this lesson into their post-war lives. Some became educators, entrepreneurs, or community leaders, applying what they learned from their time in America to help rebuild Germany. Others maintained a lasting respect for the people who had once been their captors, often speaking about their experiences in interviews or memoirs decades later. The story of German POWs in America is remarkable, not just because of the war, but because of the humanity that persisted in the midst of conflict. These men arrived expecting harsh treatment and found care, respect, and opportunity instead. Their time in the camps challenged their assumptions, changed their perceptions of the enemy, and for many altered the course of their lives. It serves as a powerful reminder that even in war, compassion, fairness, and understanding can leave a lasting impression. By the time the prisoners were repatriated to Germany, they had witnessed something extraordinary. They had seen a nation at war that could still protect, feed, and educate its captives. They had been treated with respect and fairness, and many had learned that humanity could exist even in the harshest of circumstances. For the German POWs, America was more than a captor. It was a lesson in what a nation could achieve when it combined strength with compassion, and an experience that none of them would ever forget. When the German prisoners were finally told that the war was over and that they would be repatriated to Germany, a mix of relief, anxiety, and uncertainty filled their hearts. After months, sometimes years, of living in American camps with surprising comfort and freedom, the thought of returning to a country in ruins was frightening. Many had seen or heard reports of bombed cities, starving civilians, and the collapse of infrastructure back home. Their minds were full of questions. Would their families survive? Would they find homes or jobs? Could they reintegrate into a society that had been devastated by war? The journey back to Germany was long and emotionally taxing. Transport ships, which had once carried them to America as prisoners, now carried them home as free men but into uncertainty. Along the way, many reflected on their experiences in America. They remembered the food, the fairness of the guards, the education and leisure activities, and the glimpses of everyday life in a peaceful nation. For many, the contrast between the humane treatment they had received in America and the destruction waiting at home was stark and sometimes shocking. When the prisoners finally arrived in Germany, the first sight of their homeland was often heartbreaking. Cities were reduced to rubble, homes destroyed, and streets filled with debris. Many families had lost loved ones, and the survivors faced shortages of food, water, and basic necessities. POWs who had experienced stability and abundance in America now had to confront a stark reality. Their country was in chaos, and rebuilding would be an enormous challenge. Some soldiers were overwhelmed with guilt, having been fed, housed, and cared for while their families and fellow citizens suffered. Despite these hardships, many former POWs carried lessons from their time in America. They had witnessed a society that functioned efficiently, treated its people with dignity, and provided opportunities even during wartime. This exposure challenged the rigid thinking and propaganda they had absorbed in Germany. They began to understand concepts such as fairness, freedom, and human rights in a way that was impossible to teach under the Nazi regime. These insights would later influence their personal and professional lives as Germany attempted to rebuild. The reception from family and friends varied. Some were surprised and even suspicious of what the POWs had experienced in America, as propaganda had painted the Allies in a negative light. Others were eager to hear stories about life in another country, about the abundance of food, education, and the surprising civility of their captors. Many former POWs shared tales of sports, music, and respectful treatment, which contrasted sharply with the harsh realities of war-torn Germany. These stories helped some civilians broaden their understanding of the world beyond the war and inspired new ideas about society and governance. The psychological impact on returning prisoners was profound. Many struggled to reconcile their wartime beliefs with the reality they had experienced in America. They had learned that even an enemy nation could act with fairness, humanity, and respect. This understanding often led to introspection and self-reflection, causing former soldiers to question previous loyalties and ideologies. For some, it planted the seeds of change, encouraging them to become advocates for peace, education, and social reform in post-war Germany. For others, returning home was a harsh awakening. The comfort and security they had experienced in America made the destruction and scarcity in Germany even more difficult to bear. They faced the challenge of rebuilding not only their own lives, but also their communities and country. Many former POWs took up practical work, using skills they had learned in American camps, such as farming, carpentry, and mechanical work. These skills proved invaluable in reconstructing infrastructure and helping their towns recover. Some former POWs returned with a deep sense of gratitude toward the United States and its people. They often spoke of the fairness, dignity, and humanity they had witnessed, recognizing that these values contributed to the country's strength. Many of them maintained a fascination with American culture, ideas, and governance. In later years, some even returned to the U.S. as visitors or immigrants, drawn by the memory of the life they had experienced as captives. The long-term impact of their experiences in American POW camps extended beyond personal growth. Many former prisoners became storytellers and educators, sharing their insights about humanity, fairness, and the importance of treating others with dignity. Their experiences served as lessons for future generations, highlighting how respect and understanding can survive even during the darkest times of war. These stories also helped bridge gaps between former enemies, fostering reconciliation and international understanding. Education and exposure to American life also played a significant role in shaping their perspectives. Prisoners who had attended classes, participated in vocational training, or engaged in cultural activities returned with new skills and ideas. They became advocates for education, open discussion, and democratic values. Some entered fields such as teaching, social work, or public administration, contributing to Germany's post-war recovery and transformation. The lessons learned in captivity helped them approach life with broader perspectives and a more tolerant worldview. Reintegration into civilian life was not without challenges. Many former POWs struggled with trauma from the war, feelings of guilt, and the stress of rebuilding their lives. Yet the discipline, resilience, and adaptability they developed during their time in American camps helped them cope. They had learned to navigate unfamiliar environments, work under different systems, and respect different cultures. All skills that proved essential in the post-war era. The relationships they had formed, even indirectly, with Americans influenced their outlook. POWs often described how acts of kindness, shared meals, friendly conversations, and fair treatment taught them about the strength of human decency. These experiences contrasted sharply with the harshness they had known in military life under Nazi rule. Many carried these memories throughout their lives, citing them as pivotal moments that reshaped their understanding of the world and human nature. For Germany as a whole, the return of these former POWs contributed to the country's slow recovery. They brought back not only labor and skills, but also ideas about organization, fairness, and the value of treating people with dignity. Communities learned from their experiences, and the broader society slowly absorbed lessons about human rights and democratic values. The influence of former POWs, combined with post-war reforms and reconstruction efforts, helped Germany transition from a war-torn nation to a functioning society once again. The emotional journey of these men was also profound. They had experienced fear, uncertainty, and captivity, followed by unexpected comfort, freedom, and respect. Returning home meant facing loss, destruction, and the challenge of rebuilding. Yet they carried with them the knowledge that even during war, compassion and decency existed. Many reflected on their experiences as a turning point in their lives, shaping the way they thought, acted, and contributed to society in the decades that followed. In hindsight, the story of German POWs in America is remarkable not only for the historical facts, but for the lessons it teaches about humanity. It shows that even in times of extreme conflict, people can act with fairness, empathy, and understanding. The prisoners returned to Germany changed men, more reflective, more humane, and often more determined to make a positive difference in the world. Their time in America was a testament to the power of kindness, education, and the human spirit to endure and transform lives even in the shadow of war. By the time these men fully reintegrated into post-war Germany, they had carried with them an indelible lesson that respect for others, dignity, and understanding are stronger than propaganda, fear, or hatred. Their experiences showed that even enemies could teach valuable lessons, and that the human capacity for empathy could survive even in the darkest chapters of history. For many former POWs, the unusual sight of America had permanently changed the way they viewed the world, war, and the meaning of humanity. As the last German prisoners prepared to leave America, a sense of finality and reflection settled over the camps. Years of war, captivity, and adjustment had passed, and soon they would return to a homeland they barely recognized. Many of them walked through the familiar fences and barracks one last time, thinking about how much they had changed since their arrival. They remembered their first moments in America, the fear, the disbelief, and the shock at finding a country so orderly, prosperous, and humane. These memories had left an impression that would last a lifetime, shaping the way they saw the world, people, and even themselves. For most POWs, the journey home was filled with mixed emotions. Relief at leaving captivity was paired with worry about returning to a nation devastated by war. They knew that cities lay in ruins, families had suffered unimaginable loss, and the social order was fractured. Yet the lessons they had learned in American camps gave them strength. They had seen firsthand that life could be rebuilt, that humanity could persist even in difficult circumstances, and that fairness and respect were powerful tools for overcoming hardship. These ideas would guide them as they faced the challenges awaiting them in Germany. Many former prisoners reflected on the stark contrast between their experiences in America and the war-torn environment of Europe. In Germany, destruction, scarcity, and fear had been constants. In America, they had found safety, abundance, and opportunity. This contrast highlighted not only the power and resilience of the United States, but also the importance of human decency. The acts of kindness they had witnessed, simple gestures by guards, friendly conversations, fair treatment, and access to education, had revealed a truth that propaganda could never erase. Respect and empathy can exist even between enemies. Some prisoners returned to Germany inspired to share these lessons with others. They told friends and family about the humane treatment they had received, the value of education, and the possibility of a society that worked for everyone. They spoke about the importance of fairness, patience, and understanding in rebuilding communities. Many of these men carried a renewed sense of hope, believing that if America could maintain decency in the midst of war, then Germany too could recover and build a better future. Education had been a crucial aspect of their transformation. In the camps, prisoners had attended classes, learned vocational skills, and engaged in cultural activities. This exposure had broadened their minds and challenged long-held beliefs. Back in Germany, many of them applied these lessons to improve their own lives and the lives of those around them. They became teachers, craftsmen, business people, and community leaders, bringing with them new ideas about collaboration, fairness, and civic responsibility. Their time in America had not only shaped their perspectives, but also equipped them with practical skills to help rebuild their society. The experiences of the German POWs also had a profound psychological impact. Witnessing the strength, organization, and humanity of America caused many to question previous ideologies. Some had arrived loyal to the Nazi regime, convinced of their nation's superiority, but returned with a more nuanced understanding of the world. They realized that true power did not come from domination or propaganda, but from the ability to provide stability, freedom, and opportunity for all citizens. This realization transformed their worldview and influenced the way they engaged with others after the war. Beyond personal transformation, the story of German POWs in America offers timeless lessons about humanity. Even in the darkest moments of conflict, acts of decency, fairness, and respect can leave lasting impressions. The American guards who treated prisoners with dignity, the communities that welcomed them into their towns, and the systems that provided education and work all contributed to a powerful message. Human compassion transcends national boundaries and wartime enmity. These lessons are as relevant today as they were then, demonstrating that empathy and understanding can survive even amidst conflict. The return of the POWs to Germany also revealed the broader consequences of these experiences on post-war society. The men carried back more than just memories. They brought new values and perspectives that influenced their communities. They had learned to appreciate fairness, discipline, and opportunity, and they sought to integrate these lessons into their daily lives. In towns devastated by war, the knowledge and skills gained in American camps became tools for reconstruction. Former POWs often led by example, demonstrating that cooperation, patience, and resilience were essential for recovery. Even decades later, many former POWs spoke of their time in America with a mixture of nostalgia, respect, and amazement. They remembered the first moments of disbelief upon arrival, the gradual adjustment to camp life, and the surprising freedoms and opportunities they experienced. They reflected on how these experiences had shaped their values, careers, and families. Some kept in touch with Americans they had met, returning to visit the places where they had lived as prisoners. These connections served as enduring reminders that shared humanity could bridge even the deepest divides. The story of the German POWs in America is also a reminder of the power of perspective. War can distort reality and fill minds with fear and hatred, but exposure to new experiences and cultures can open eyes to truth. For these men, living in America challenged their assumptions, expanded their understanding, and ultimately transformed their lives. They discovered that even those labeled as enemies could teach valuable lessons about morality, resilience, and the potential for positive change. As they reintegrated into German society, the lessons of decency and fairness influenced their approach to family, work, and community. Many former prisoners became advocates for education, equality, and civic responsibility, seeking to prevent the mistakes that had led their country into devastation. The time spent in American camps had not only preserved their lives, but had also given them tools to rebuild a society with a stronger moral foundation. The experiences underscored that even in captivity, individuals could grow, learn, and carry forward the ideals of humanity. Ultimately, the journey of the German POWs is a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. They arrived expecting suffering, cruelty, and fear, yet found kindness, fairness, and opportunity. They returned to a broken homeland, carrying the lessons of empathy, discipline, and understanding. Their experiences demonstrate that even in the midst of war, humanity can thrive, and that individuals can emerge stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. These lessons resonate far beyond the historical context, offering insights for generations to come. The story concludes not just with the end of captivity, but with the broader realization that how we treat others, even in extreme circumstances, leaves a lasting mark. For the German POWs, America was more than a captor. It was a teacher. It revealed that compassion, fairness, and respect are powerful forces capable of shaping minds and hearts. These lessons helped the men navigate the challenges of post-war life, rebuild their communities, and embrace a broader, more humane worldview. Their experiences remain a timeless reminder of the potential for goodness to emerge even in the darkest times. By the end of their journey, the POWs carried a profound truth: that dignity, empathy, and human decency are not weakened by conflict. They are strengthened by it. They had witnessed it, lived it, and returned home transformed. This was the most unusual, surprising, and ultimately life-changing lesson of their lives: that even amid war, respect and humanity could not only survive but flourish.